Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Big Markets Think Simple. Quick question. Have you ever been to Subway? You pick your bread, load it up with whatever toppings and sauces you want, and the person behind the counter builds it right in front of you. You're calling the shots on the recipe, but actually making it taste good consistently every single time? That's on the person doing the work. Believe it or not, the biotech industry works a lot like that. Global pharmaceutical companies come up with the recipe, the drug, but actually manufacturing that drug safely, cleanly, and at the same quality level every single batch, that's an entirely different problem. Biologic drugs aren't like regular pills. They're made using living cells, which makes the production process incredibly complex. So more and more, pharma companies are outsourcing that job to specialists. That's exactly what Samsung Biologics does, which raises an obvious question. These are some of the biggest, richest, most technically sophisticated companies on the planet. Why aren't they just building their own factories? And how is Samsung Biologics, a company that doesn't develop a single drug of its own, pulling in over $1.5 billion in operating profit every year? Let's get into it.
This video is not investment advice. It's for educational, entertainment, informational purposes only. I'm not a financial advisor. Please do your own research before making any investment decisions. Any investment decisions are your own responsibility.
So what does Samsung Biologics actually do? In one sentence, Samsung Biologics manufactures biologic drugs on behalf of global pharmaceutical companies. Here's how that plays out in practice. Say Pfizer or Roche develops a new cancer drug. Years of research, clinical trials, FDA approval, the whole process. Now they need to sell it to the world. Here's the problem. To mass produce a biologic drug, you need a specialized facility. We're talking billions of dollars to build and years to construct. And once it's built, it still has to pass rigorous inspections from regulators like the FDA before a single vial ships. So pharma companies start doing the math. We don't even know how well this drug will sell yet. Do we really want to commit billions to our own factory right now? That's why they turn to companies like Samsung Biologics, already built, already proven, already cleared by regulators. This is the CDMO model. CDMO stands for Contract Development and Manufacturing Organization. In plain English, a company that develops and manufactures drugs on behalf of other companies. Now you might be thinking, isn't making a drug basically like running a chemical plant? Not even close. Your everyday aspirin or cold medicine is made by chemically synthesizing compounds. Biologic drugs, insulin, vaccines, growth hormones, and antibody therapies are made using living cells or biological processes. Samsung Biologics specializes in antibody therapies. These are proteins engineered to seek out and attack specific targets, like cancer cells or inflammation triggers. You can't stamp these out on an assembly line. Living cells have to produce them. Here's how it works. You start with the DMA instructions that tell a cell how to make the antibody. That DNA gets inserted into production cells, which then read the blueprint and start churning out the protein. Finding the cells that do this most efficiently, that's called cell line development. When a pharma client brings their drug concept to Samsung Biologics, the company can either help develop the cell line from scratch, that's the CDO side, or take an already developed process and scale it out for mass production, that's the CMO side. At the end of the day, Samsung Biologics exists so that pharma companies can stay focused on discovering and selling drugs while someone else handles the hard part of actually making them. So why is this business booming right now?
Simple answer, the market is growing fast. The global biologic CDMO market is estimated at around $27 to $30 billion in 2026, and it's expected to keep compounding at roughly 10% per year. The reason comes down to a structural shift happening across the entire pharmaceutical industry. I'll do the science, you handle the manufacturing. Developing a single new drug costs billions of dollars and takes a decade or more with no guarantee it works. On top of that, building a dedicated biofacility and getting it up and running can take another 5 to 6 years. If the drug flops or gets delayed, you're looking at a loss you can't easily recover from. For smaller biotech startups, outsourcing manufacturing isn't a preference, it's a survival strategy. But even the biggest pharma companies are leaning on CDMOs to cut capital risk and get drugs to market faster. So who's winning in this market? The global biologic CDMO market is dominated by a handful of players. Lonza out of Switzerland, Thermo Fisher in the US, WuXi Biologics from China, and Samsung Biologics. Together, these companies control over half the market. Samsung Biologics' biggest edge is pure scale. Their total production capacity sits at 845,000 liters, the largest at a single site anywhere in the world. Plants 1 through 4 are all running at full capacity as of 2025. The second edge is regulatory credibility. Samsung Biologics has racked up over 400 global regulatory approvals. When a pharma client asks, can we trust that drugs coming out of this facility will clear the FDA or EMA, Samsung Biologics is one of the very few companies that can answer with a firm yes. They now work with over 145 clients, including 17 of the top 20 global pharmaceutical companies. And because switching CDMO providers requires going through new regulatory approvals, a process that can take years, clients tend to stay. The bigger the client base, the more stable utilization rate and the more resilient the business. There's also a major geopolitical tailwind at play. With the U.S. Biosecure Act taking effect in 2026, WuXi Biologics is effectively being pushed out of the American market. The company's positioned to absorb that volume, ones with SPAY capacity, FDA track record, and geopolitical credibility, are few. Samsung Biologics is near the top of that list. The numbers back up the story. CDMO revenue went from about $900 million in 2020 to $3.3 billion in 2025, roughly 4x growth in 5 years with no down years in between. But the more impressive figure is operating profit. In 2025, Samsung Biologics posted an operating margin of 45.4%. For a manufacturing company, that's extraordinary. Clients aren't paying for cheap production, they're paying for certainty. That premium is built into the price, and as utilization climbs, fixed costs stay flat while revenue scales. Classic operating leverage. Then there's the backlog. As of Q1 2026, cumulative contract value sits at $21.4 billion. That's more than 6 times annual revenue and committed, not yet produced orders. In a business built on long-term contracts, a backlog like that means strong revenue visibility for years ahead. Geographically, 90% of revenue comes from the US, 38%, and Europe, 52%. This is a Korean company, but it's effectively a global B2B export business serving the world's top pharma companies. Bottom line, Samsung Biologics isn't just a company that built a big factory. It's a company that filled that factory with global demand, earns premium margins on every order, and has years of future revenue already locked in. So where does the growth go from here? Samsung Biologics' growth strategy breaks down into 2 main moves: build more and move up market. First, more capacity. A second campus in Songdo will add 3 more plants 6, 7, and 8, bringing total capacity to 1.324 million liters by 2032. That's more than 1.5x current capacity, and a gap that competitors will struggle to close anytime soon. They're also expanding U.S.-based production through a facility in Rockville, Maryland, acquired in 2025, to reduce tariff exposure and strengthen relationships with American clients. Second, higher value products. The biggest bet here is ADCs, antibody-drug conjugates. Think of them as precision-guided missiles, an antibody engineered to lock onto cancer cells, carrying a powerful drug payload that kills them on contact. ADCs are one of the fastest-growing segments in biotech right now.
Antibodies are
Samsung
purified and
Biologics
linked to potent
completed a
anti-cancer
dedicated
payloads.
ADC
This complex
manufacturing
process creates
facility
high-value
and moved into commercial operations in 2026. Because ADC production is significantly more complex than standard antibody manufacturing, the margins are higher and the barriers to entry are steeper. They're also building out capabilities in mRNA, bispecific antibodies, and cell and gene therapy. The vision is to evolve from the company that makes a lot of antibodies into a full-service global biologics production platform. Every growth story has a flip side. Here's what to watch. Tariff risk. The U.S. has floated the possibility of tariffs as high as 100% on imported pharmaceuticals. If that materializes, shipping drugs from Korea to the U.S. gets significantly more expensive. Some clients have already started pushing for U.S.-based manufacturing, and there are reports that new contract negotiations are taking longer than expected as a result. Labor costs. 2026 labor cost estimates came in 75% higher than previously projected. Expanding U.S. operations means competing for expensive talent. Add rising domestic wages in Korea, and you've got a real margin headwind building. ADC revenue ramp. The ADC facility is up and running, but large commercial contracts haven't materialized as the market hoped. The technology is there, but clients are taking their time before committing major projects to a relatively new setup. Labor relations. A strike occurred in 2025, and tensions around wages and governance haven't been fully resolved. In a business where
Operations are stable, but
quality
labor
depends
concerns
on
persist.
skilled,
We must
experienced
resolve
people
this for
showing up
stability.
and doing precise
Workers need
work,
assurances on
prolonged
schedules.
internal
Overtime
friction
issues
is a
are
risk
unresolved.
that can
Let's review
eventually
the
reach
data.
clients. Let's bring it all
개발
together.
단계에서는 연구원들이
Samsung
신약을 설계하고
Biologics
테스트합니다.
exists to
제조
bridge the
단계에서는
gap
대규모
between a
생산을
drug
위해
being
공정이
discovered
최적화됩니다.
and that
공급
drug
단계에서는 백신이
actually
전 세계로
reaching
안전하게
patients
배송됩니다.
by
이
handling the
모든 과정이
production
환자의
that
건강을 위해
most pharma
이어집니다.
companies
이
can't
모든
or
단계가
won't do
정밀하게 연결되어
themselves. Their real product isn't antibodies, it's trust, the assurance that if you hand them your drug, it'll come out the other side meeting every standard, every time. The risks, tariffs, labor costs, ADC ramp, internal tensions deserve ongoing attention, but the structural tailwind is clear. More biologics are being developed, production is only getting harder, and the value of a CDMO you can actually rely on keeps going up.
If Samsung Biologics can hold on to that trust, they won't just be a leading Korean biotech company, they'll be an invisible but essential engine quietly powering the global pharmaceutical industry. That's it for today. If you found this helpful, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. It genuinely helps the channel. See you next time.